millennials and first-time home buyers when it comes to getting a mortgage and getting into real estate in Canada? Well, I'll start with a brief introduction as to what's been going on. So for those who are familiar with what's been going on in the real estate market, you'll know that the Canadian government has, over the last year, since about April 2017, has been consistently bringing in new mortgage rules as well as increasing interest rates through the Bank of Canada. By doing that, they're actually making it more expensive to get a mortgage, to qualify for a mortgage, and the carrying cost associated with that mortgage. All of these things have a detrimental impact when it comes to getting into your first home. So when we're talking about a real estate market, especially for those within the major urban centers like Vancouver and Toronto, when we're talking about these markets, and we're looking at how expensive these homes are getting, why is it then that the government seems to be attacking millennials and new home buyers when they need the help the most? Well, in this video, that's exactly what we're looking at doing, and we're looking at addressing. So let me get straight into it. For starters, the simplest answer is that it is the easiest thing for them to do. When you look at the government, especially the federal government, you're looking at a huge institution that governs all of Canada and really has to paint, with their policies, has to paint solutions with one wide brush, which actually has a detrimental impact for communities that aren't affected as much as, for instance, the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, and Vancouver, and some of the other hot markets across Canada. But these two markets are what specifically the Canadian government is trying to address, because they do not want a overheated bubble of a real estate market. And this is why they're bringing in these concerns. So when I've had an opportunity to speak to and hear from economists, mortgage specialists, real estate industry experts, I've really had an opportunity to hone into this one question. So when I addressed this question to one of the leading economists at the Canadian Real Estate Association, he had a bit of a nuanced answer. But in essence, the federal government is addressing housing issues by making it more expensive on the mortgage side and on the interest rate side, because it's what they can do. So it's very easy for the government, and in the past they've done this as well, to try to address inflation. What they do is they just play with the Bank of Canada lending rate. That overnight rate impacts all of the lenders across Canada, and as a result, the lenders across Canada have to adjust their interest rates because they need to make a profit, and so on and so forth. And whatever amount of interest rate that they borrow from the Bank of Canada, it reflects the interest rate that they lend to consumers across the nation. So for starters, it's one of the levers that the Canadian government has access to. But what a lot of these people are saying is that's the wrong approach. What they really want to see is supply increase, because consistently, when you talk to leading experts in the real estate market across Canada, almost unanimously, they express the concern that it's a supply issue, not a demand issue. And by the government making it more difficult for people to get the mortgage so they can get into the house, they're in so doing attacking demand. But then the next question is, well, supply and demand, is that not something that will balance itself out? Well, this is the question I posed to the Canadian Real Estate Association leading economist who studies these types of things. And in essence, what he was emphasizing is that, yes, absolutely, they are attacking the demand side, and the ideal situation is they promote the supply side by creating more affordable housing. For instance, this doesn't necessarily mean subsidized housing, because that's a different thing. To promote affordable housing means you're promoting townhomes, condo towns, condo apartment buildings, even semi-detached, anything where the density of population and the buildings are larger. This makes it easier for consumers to find homes that are not as expensive as housing opportunities, or perhaps make it easier for developers to go and create these developments where there's high density, much higher volume of homes, so that we can cater to those millennials and those first-time home buyers who are struggling to get into the real estate market. Now, the only problem with this is that the Canadian federal government doesn't really have much control when it comes to this. For instance, the province of Ontario, because I'm from Ontario, I'll use this as an example. The province of Ontario is mandating to municipalities and regions across the province that we need to make a plan for the growth in population. If you watch one of my previous videos, you'll see that when I address the population growth, the GTA alone it currently is in and around the 6.5 million people population. Whereas by 2040, it's going to be closer to 9.5 million, which is a huge growth. And that's what the province is trying to stress, is that, listen, we're having this growth in population, both immigration, urbanization, people coming from the country to the city to find jobs because of mechanization and economic factors. This is putting pressure on the housing affordability and the housing availability. As a result, we need to get more housing. But the province isn't the one who approves developments. It's the municipalities and the regions. So the municipalities and the regions are now being told by the province, listen, we need more housing. And the municipalities and regions are trying to react to that by setting city planning. They have to plan this over time, and that takes a lot of time. So the problem is obviously the biggest stakeholder in this whole thing are consumers and voters. So people who already own real estate are typically the ones to be most active when it comes to voting, and therefore politicians have those people as a special stakeholder when it comes to making sure that they're happy. Same thing applies for politicians municipally. These politicians require the vote in order to make their agendas move forward. And so even though the province is pushing in this direction, municipalities and regions are slow to adopt because they're afraid that if they flood the market with additional supply, then their voters will be unhappy because real estate prices may not go up at the same rate that they're used to. So that's one reason why we might be running up against a few issues. But in addition to that, what we are also seeing is that developers are very difficult to really mandate what they have to do because they're motivated by a profit motive. And that profit motive is quite strong. And in order to make the best bang for your buck, they don't necessarily want to have, even if you did permit them to have tons of land so they can build as many, and you green light and you move development applications through a lot quicker, keeping in mind they are quite slower than they were about 20 years ago. Maybe 6 months now works out to be 2 to 3 years. 6 months 20 years ago works out to be 2 or 3 years now when it comes to getting purchase the property to the day that you can actually put shovel in the ground. And that's in the best case scenario. Certainly there's property out there, and we have one listed right now where you might be looking at property that takes 7 to 10 years before you have an opportunity to green light and build something. So anyways, let me get off of that. Let me get straight back to the point. At the end of the day, if you give all of these builders an opportunity to build property, well, they may also conserve the amount that they build so that they can increase the dollar value they get from each sale of each property. Whereas if they start releasing hundreds upon hundreds of houses at the same time, then they may not get as much money. And this is why you see new developments have phases. So phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is because they want to sell the amount of inventory they have available before they start making new inventory, and then they can maximize their return for their investors. So that's a pretty vague, but pretty as deep in as I can get at this point as to why the government cannot go and push as hard, or isn't pushing as hard on the supply side, whereas they have complete control over the interest rates and the ability to borrow, which reduces demand, and as a result, it's putting pressure on the affordable housing and housing in general. Now, keep in mind, this is going to be a growing issue throughout the next decade, really, because when you look at Canada, it's in a fantastic position when you talk about it as a world economic position, because when you think about it, Canada is probably going to be one of the biggest recipients of international refugees from climate change and global climate change. In addition, we have over 300,000 immigrants coming to Canada every year. We're now one of the most sought after countries when it comes to stability in the government, stability economically, and obviously education and quality of life are huge. We have tons of space, but yet we're so much focused on the southern border between the US and Canada. So you find that there's a compounding interest there. And if you watch one of my other videos, you'll see a map of 2005 versus 2017 of just the GTA, and you'll see how much the pressure of housing is pushed up against the greenbelt, which restricts the amount of urban sprawl that can happen. Anyways, the long and the short of it is, when you increase supply, you're going to be able to address the housing issues that we see today. Right away, which makes it easier for them to promote their activities to the public. But on the opposite side, it doesn't address the true problem, which is supply. And this is why we're seeing difficulties with that respect. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them below. And I will try to continue to put videos out as frequently as possible. Certainly, I will be having videos out at least once a week. And I also have another channel called the Mayer-Harman Minute. If you're interested in real estate topics, we hit out real estate information within a 60-second span for one topic. Every week it's released for a year. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't hesitate to leave comments below or questions that I can answer, and I'll talk to you next time. All the best.